The distant sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, as Leanne Sullivan ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding like a stampede in her chest. It was supposed to be a simple trip to the general store, not a desperate fight for survival amid the chaos of an unexpected bank robbery gone wrong. Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878, had been relatively peaceful until today. Leanne pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the fine fabric a remnant of her former life back east. At 24, she'd come west on her own after the death of her parents, determined to make a new life as the town's schoolteacher. Now, crouched in the dirt with bullets splintering wood inches from her head, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "There she is," a gruff voice called out. "Get her." Before Leanne could react, rough hands grabbed her by the arms, yanking her to her feet. She found herself staring into the cruel, weathered face of a man with a scar running from his eye to his mouth. Well, what do we have here?" The outlaw's breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco as he grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Boys, I think we just found our ticket out of town." "Please," Leanne begged, struggling against his grip. "I'm just the schoolteacher." "Perfect," another outlaw said, stepping forward, a bandana pulled halfway down his face. "Nobody wants to shoot a schoolteacher." The man who seemed to be their leader, a tall, lean figure with a black hat pulled low, nodded toward the end of the street where several deputies had taken positions behind barrels and corners of buildings. "Bring her along. She's our shield now." Terror seized Leanne's throat as they dragged her toward the hitching posts where their horses waited. 4 men, all armed, using her as protection against the law. She'd heard stories of outlaws doing such things, but never imagined she'd be the unfortunate soul caught in the middle. The outlaws formed a tight circle around her, guns pointed outward as they inched toward their mounts. The leader kept his arm wrapped around her neck, the cold steel of his revolver pressed against her temple. "Nobody move or the lady gets it." He shouted toward the gathering crowd of townspeople and lawmen who had surrounded them at a distance. Sheriff Wilson stood at the front of the gathering, his face grim. "Let her go, Blackwater. This won't end well for you." "It's gonna end just fine," the leader, apparently named Blackwater, growled. "We're riding out with the money and she's coming with us until we're clear." Leanne's eyes darted desperately around the crowd of faces, searching for anyone who might help her. The sheriff looked hesitant, unwilling to risk her life with hasty action. The deputies kept their weapons trained but seemed equally uncertain. Then she noticed him. Standing just outside the saloon, a tall figure watched the scene unfold with an intensity that made him stand out from the rest of the onlookers. He wore a dusty brown duster over a simple shirt, faded denim pants and boots that had seen many miles. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but Leanne could make out a strong jawline and eyes that seemed to calculate every detail of the situation. The man stepped forward, moving with a fluid confidence that caused several people to step aside, making a path for him. "That's far enough, stranger," Blackwater called out, tightening his grip on Leanne. The man stopped in the middle of the street, now fully visible to everyone. He stood alone, exposed, with no cover whatsoever. "Let the lady go," he said, his voice calm yet carrying across the tense silence that had fallen over the street. One of the outlaws laughed. "Or what? There's 4 of us and 1 of you." The stranger didn't move, didn't flinch. "I won't ask again. Who the hell do you think you are?" Blackwater snarled. "Name's Nathan Reed," the man replied simply. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even Leanne had heard whispers of that name during her 6 months in the territory. Nathan Reed, a former lawman turned bounty hunter, known for tracking the worst criminals across the harshest terrain, a man whose draw was said to be faster than lightning. "We don't care who you are," the outlaw to Leanne's right spat. "We got a hostage and we're leaving." Nathan's gaze shifted briefly to Leanne's. In that moment, despite her fear, she felt an inexplicable connection, as if he were silently telling her to trust him. "Madam," Nathan said calmly, "when I give the word, I need you to drop straight down. Can you do that?" Blackwater pressed the gun harder against her temple. "She ain't doing nothing, and if you move an inch I'll put a bullet in her pretty head." Nathan didn't acknowledge the threat. His focus remained fixed on Leanne, waiting for her answer. With the smallest movement possible, she nodded. "Now." Nathan called. Leanne dropped like a stone, falling to her knees and then flat against the dirt. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though it couldn't have lasted more than 2 seconds. Nathan's hands moved in a blur, drawing both his revolvers from their holsters. 4 shots rang out in such rapid succession, they almost sounded like one continuous explosion. When Leanne dared to look up, all 4 outlaws were on the ground. Each had been shot in the arm or shoulder that held their weapon, disabling but not killing shots. Nathan stood exactly where he had been, thin wisps of smoke still curling from the barrels of his guns. For a moment, nobody moved. Then suddenly, the street erupted in activity as deputies rushed forward to secure the wounded outlaws. Nathan holstered his weapons and walked toward Leanne, extending his hand to help her up. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Leanne took his hand, noticing the surprising warmth of it as he pulled her to her feet. "No, I don't think so." Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, the shock of what had just happened beginning to set in. "You're safe now," he said, still holding her hand to steady her. Up close, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a face weathered by sun and wind. A thin scar ran along his left cheek, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "Thank you," she managed to say, suddenly aware that the entire town was watching them. "You saved my life." Nathan nodded, finally releasing her hand. "Just happened to be in the right place." Sheriff Wilson approached, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. "Reed. Didn't expect to see you in these parts. Mighty glad you showed up when you did." "Just passing through, Sheriff," Nathan replied. "Heard these fellas were wanted in 3 territories. That they are. Reward money's yours, of course." Nathan glanced back at Leanne. "Make sure the lady gets home safe." Before Leanne could say anything more, Nathan tipped his hat to her and turned to walk away, presumably to help the deputies with the outlaws. "Wait," she called after him. When he paused and looked back, she found herself momentarily at a loss for words. Will you be staying in town?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "For a day or 2, got business to attend to." With that, he walked away, leaving Leanne standing in the middle of the street with a strange mixture of relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite identify stirring in her chest. Mrs. Harriet Cooper, the wife of the general store owner, hurried over and wrapped a protective arm around Leanne's shoulders. "You poor dear, what a terrible ordeal. Come along, let's get you someplace quiet where you can recover from the shock." As Mrs. Cooper led her away, Leanne couldn't help but look back over her shoulder at the tall figure of Nathan Reed, now speaking with the sheriff as the deputies loaded the outlaws into a wagon bound for the jailhouse. She had no way of knowing then that her life had just changed forever. The small room above the schoolhouse that served as Leanne's living quarters felt especially quiet that evening. She sat at her modest writing desk, pen in hand, attempting to document the day's events in her journal, but the words wouldn't come. Her hand still trembled slightly, and every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cold metal of the outlaw's gun pressed against her temple. A soft knock at her door startled her. Cautiously, she approached and called out, "Who is it?" "It's Emma Wilson, Miss Sullivan, the sheriff's wife." "I've brought you some supper." Leanne opened the door to find the kindly woman holding a covered basket. "Mrs. Wilson, you shouldn't have troubled yourself." "Nonsense," Emma said firmly, stepping inside and placing the basket on the small table. "After what you've been through today, the last thing you need to worry about is cooking a meal." She began unpacking the basket, revealing a container of still warm stew, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. "Besides, I wanted to check on you myself." "That's very kind," Leanne said, suddenly realizing she was indeed hungry. Please, won't you join me? Emma sat across from her as Leanne began to eat. The whole town's talking about what happened, Emma said, and about that Reed fellow. Leanne paused with her spoon midway to her mouth. What are they saying about him? Oh, all sorts of things. Some say he's killed 50 men, others say it's 100. They say he can track a man across bare rock in the dark of night. Emma waved her hand dismissively. Men and their tall tales. But Thomas the sheriff, he says Nathan Reed is the real article. One of the best he's ever seen with a gun, but not some glory-seeking gunslinger. He only draws when necessary. He saved my life, Leanne said softly. That he did. Emma studied her for a moment. He's staying at the hotel. Thomas invited him to dinner tomorrow night at our house. Said it was the least we could do. She paused. I was hoping you might join us as well. Leanne felt her cheeks warm. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition at all. In fact, I insist. Emma smiled knowingly. Besides, I think Mr. Reed would appreciate seeing a familiar face. After Emma left, Leanne found herself standing before her small mirror, assessing her appearance more critically than she had in months. Her chestnut hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes, which her father had always said were her best feature, seemed brighter somehow, despite the day's trauma. The simple blue dress she wore for teaching suddenly seemed inadequate. She opened her trunk and pulled out the one fine dress she'd brought from Boston, a deep emerald green that she'd only worn once since arriving in Arizona. It would need pressing, but it would do for tomorrow night. Only after she'd laid it out did she question why she cared so much about her appearance for a simple dinner. She told herself it was merely a matter of showing proper gratitude to the man who had saved her life, nothing more. But as she finally drifted off to sleep that night, it was Nathan Reed's storm-gray eyes that followed her into her dreams. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Leanne had canceled classes, as Sheriff Wilson had suggested she take a few days to recover, but sitting alone in her room only made her more anxious. By mid-morning, she decided to walk to the general store, needing fresh air and a distraction from her thoughts. The town seemed to be returning to normal after yesterday's excitement. Men tipped their hats to her as she passed, and several women stopped to express their concern for her well-being. Word had spread quickly about her dinner invitation, too, as Mrs. Pemberley from the millinery shop gave her a knowing smile and whispered, "That Mr. Reed is quite handsome, isn't he? And single, from what I hear." Leanne demurred with a polite smile, though she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach at the mention of his name. As she exited the general store with a small package of hairpins, she nearly collided with someone entering. "Pardon me, I wasn't," she looked up, and the words died in her throat. Nathan Reed stood before her, looking somewhat different in the daylight. He'd shaved, and instead of the dusty duster, he wore a clean dark shirt with a simple vest. His gun belt, however, remained firmly in place. "Miss Sullivan," he said, removing his hat. "Good to see you're doing all right." "Mr. Reed." She found herself clutching the package of hairpins tightly. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. "I hear we'll both be at the sheriff's for dinner tonight," he finally said. "Yes, Mrs. Wilson was kind enough to invite me." Nathan shifted his weight slightly. "I'm glad. I was hoping to see you again, to make sure you were recovering from yesterday." Something in his tone suggested genuine concern rather than mere politeness. "I'm still a bit shaken," she admitted, "but much better thanks to you." He shook his head. "I just happened to be there. You risked your life for a complete stranger. That's not something just anyone would do." A hint of color touched his cheeks. "It's what needed doing, that's all." He cleared his throat. "I should let you get on with your day." "I'll see you this evening, Miss Sullivan." "Leanne," she said impulsively. "Please call me Leanne," he nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Leanne," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Until tonight, then." As he walked away, Leanne realized she was holding her breath. She released it slowly, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. It was ridiculous to feel this way about a man she'd just met, especially under such circumstances. He was probably just passing through town, as he'd said, and would be gone within days. Still, as she returned to her room to prepare for the evening, she found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair in a style that had been fashionable in Boston the year before, and dabbing a tiny amount of rose water at her wrists and throat. The Wilson home was one of the nicest in Redemption Creek, a proper two-story house with a wide porch and actual glass windows. As Leanne approached, she could see lanterns glowing warmly inside and caught the delicious aroma of roasting meat. Emma Wilson greeted her at the door with a warm embrace. "You look lovely, my dear. Come in, come in. Thomas and Mr. Reed are in the parlor." Leanne followed Emma through to a comfortably furnished room where Sheriff Wilson and Nathan stood talking by the fireplace, tumblers of whiskey in hand. Both men turned as she entered. "Miss Sullivan," the sheriff said warmly, "glad you could join us." But Leanne barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on Nathan, whose eyes had widened slightly at the sight of her. He seemed different again. His hair was combed neatly, and he wore a jacket over his vest and shirt. Though still not dressed as formally as an Eastern gentleman might be for dinner, the effort he'd made was noticeable. "You look beautiful," he said quietly when she reached them. "Thank you," she replied, acutely aware of the Wilsons exchanging glances nearby. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Emma proving to be an excellent cook and Thomas Wilson an engaging host. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from the weather to news from back east. Nathan spoke little about himself, despite the sheriff's occasional attempts to draw out stories of his exploits. "So what brings you to our little town, Mr. Reed?" Emma asked as she served apple cobbler for dessert. "Besides apprehending dangerous outlaws, of course." Nathan set down his fork. "I've been tracking the Blackwater gang for nearly 3 months. Their leader, James Blackwater, and his men have robbed banks and stagecoaches across 3 territories. They killed 2 guards in their last robbery in Tucson. And now they'll face justice," Sheriff Wilson said firmly. "There's one more," Nathan said. "Their scout, a man named Cole Harrington, he wasn't with them yesterday. According to Blackwater, he was supposed to meet them north of here tomorrow." Leanne felt a chill. "So there's still one of them out there." Nathan's eyes met hers. "Not for long." "I'm riding out at first light to find him." "Alone?" she asked before she could stop herself. "It's how I work best," he replied simply. After dinner, Emma suggested they take coffee on the porch to enjoy the cool evening air. Sheriff Wilson begged off, saying he needed to check on the prisoners at the jail, leaving Leanne alone with Nathan on the porch while Emma cleared the table inside. They sat side by side on a bench, a respectable distance between them, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. "It's beautiful here," Leanne said softly. "So different from Boston." "Is that where you're from?" Nathan asked. She nodded. "I came west 6 months ago after my parents died. Father was a professor, mother a teacher. I followed in their footsteps but needed a fresh start. It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind," he said, his voice holding a note of admiration. "What about you?" she asked. "Where are you from?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Nowhere in particular. My father was cavalry. We moved from fort to fort until I was 16. After that, I've mostly been on my own." "And how did you become?" She hesitated, not wanting to say gunfighter or bounty hunter. "A man who chases outlaws," he finished for her with a slight smile. "I was a deputy marshal for a while, found I worked better on my own. The bounties pay well enough, and I only go after men who truly deserve bringing in. Like the ones who tried to kill me," she said quietly. His expression darkened. "Yes." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Leanne had 1,000 questions she wanted to ask him but didn't know where to begin. "How long will you stay?" she finally asked. "After you find this last outlaw." Nathan looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I hadn't really thought about it. I usually move on pretty quick." "Of course," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "I imagine your work keeps you moving." "It has," he agreed. But he seemed to be weighing his words carefully. I've been thinking lately that moving around all the time isn't much of a life. Before Leanne could respond, Emma called from inside that the coffee was ready. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly, but all too quickly. When it came time to leave, Nathan insisted on walking Leanne back to her quarters above the schoolhouse. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, the silver moonlight casting long shadows. Neither seemed in a hurry to end the evening. "Thank you again," Leanne said as they reached the steps leading up to her door, "for saving my life yesterday." "Anyone would have done the same," he said. She shook her head. "No, they wouldn't. You stood alone against 4 armed men. That takes a special kind of courage." Nathan looked down at her, his expression softening. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of them, but of missing, of not being fast enough to protect you." The confession surprised her. "You certainly didn't look afraid." "Years of practice," he said with a hint of a smile. "But when I saw them dragging you like that..." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "I couldn't stand by and let them hurt you." Leanne's heart quickened at the intensity in his voice. Will you come back?" "After you find this last outlaw," Nathan reached out slowly, almost hesitantly, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused but gentle. "Would you want me to?" "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. Something changed in his eyes, then a warmth, a spark of something that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her and found herself hoping he would. Instead, he took a small step back, ever the gentleman. "Then I'll come back." He tipped his hat to her and turned to go. "Nathan," she called after him, the first time she'd used his first name. When he looked back, she said, "Be careful tomorrow." A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, madam." She watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the shadows of the street, and wondered if she was being foolish, feeling this way about a man whose life seemed so different from hers. A man who might ride away and never return, despite his promise. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself praying that he would come back safely and soon. Dawn broke clear and cold over Redemption Creek. Leanne had slept poorly, troubled by dreams of gunfire and outlaws. She rose early and stood at her window, watching as the town slowly came to life. She spotted Nathan leading his horse from the livery stable, already prepared for his journey. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and hurried down the stairs and out into the street. "Nathan." She called, drawing curious glances from early risers making their way to work. He turned, surprise evident on his face as she approached. "Leanne, you're up early." "I wanted to see you before you left," she said, suddenly self-conscious about her hasty appearance and the impropriety of her actions. Ladies didn't chase after men in the street, especially not while wearing only a nightdress and shawl, but Nathan didn't seem to mind. His expression softened as he looked at her. "I'm glad you did." "I made this for you," she said, pulling a small cloth-wrapped package from her pocket. "It's not much, just some biscuits and jerky for your journey." He accepted the package, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you." "That's mighty kind." An awkward silence fell between them, both seemingly aware of the townspeople watching their exchange with interest. "You'll be careful?" she asked. "Always am," he assured her. Then, lowering his voice so only she could hear, he added, "I've got a reason to come back now." The simple statement sent warmth spreading through her chest. "How long will you be gone?" 2 days. 3 at most." He hesitated, then said, "Will you have dinner with me when I return? Just the 2 of us," Leanne nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his face and made him look younger, less weathered by his hard life. "Then I'll see you soon." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, tipped his hat to her, and rode out of town, the rising sun at his back. Leanne stood watching until he disappeared from sight, ignoring the knowing looks and whispers from passers-by. She knew her behavior was scandalous by the standards of proper society, but in that moment, she didn't care. She only cared that he would return safely. The next 2 days passed with excruciating slowness. Leanne resumed teaching, grateful for the distraction but found her thoughts constantly drifting to Nathan. Had he found the outlaw? Was he safe? Would he really return as promised? On the morning of the third day, she woke with a sense of anticipation. Today, surely, he would return. She took extra care with her appearance before heading to the schoolhouse, earning curious looks from her students. "Miss Sullivan," young Billy Thompson asked during arithmetic, "are you expecting a special visitor today?" The other children giggled and Leanne felt her cheeks warm. "That's enough, Billy. Please return to your sums." By afternoon, there was still no sign of Nathan. Leanne tried to focus on grading papers after dismissing the children, but found herself glancing repeatedly at the window, watching the road into town. As dusk approached with no sign of him, worry began to gnaw at her. What if something had happened? What if the outlaw had gotten the better of him? What if he'd simply decided not to return? She was just about to lock up the schoolhouse when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart leapt, and she hurried outside, expecting to see Nathan. Instead, she found Sheriff Wilson dismounting from his horse, his expression grim. "Miss Sullivan," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Cold dread settled in her stomach. "What's happened? Is it Nathan?" The sheriff nodded. "Reed sent a telegram from Copper Ridge about 30 miles north. He found Harrington, but there was trouble. The message just said he's been delayed and not to worry." "Delayed? What kind of trouble?" Leanne pressed. "He didn't say, but—" Wilson hesitated. Another wire came in an hour later from the sheriff in Copper Ridge. There was a shooting. Reed was injured, but the message said it wasn't life-threatening. Leanne felt as though the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. "Injured? How badly?" "I don't know the details, Miss Sullivan." "The telegram just said he was being treated by the doctor there and would recover." "I need to go to him," she said immediately. Sheriff Wilson's eyebrows shot up. "Now, Miss Sullivan, that wouldn't be proper. Reed's a tough one. He'll be back when he's able." "I don't care about what's proper," Leanne said firmly. "Is there a stage to Copper Ridge?" "Day after tomorrow," Wilson replied, clearly taken aback by her determination. "But it's not safe for a lady to travel alone, and then I'll hire a wagon," she interrupted. "Or ride, if necessary." The sheriff stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "My wife would never forgive me if I let you go alone. Let me see if I can arrange an escort, maybe one of the deputies." Leanne nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll be ready to leave at first light." After the sheriff left, Leanne hurried back to her quarters and began packing a small bag. She knew her behavior would set tongues wagging throughout town, but she couldn't bring herself to care. All that mattered was getting to Nathan. As she packed, she wondered at the strength of her feelings for a man she barely knew. It defied all logic, all propriety. Yet she couldn't deny that in the few days since he'd saved her life, Nathan Reed had come to mean more to her than anyone had in a very long time. The journey to Copper Ridge was long and uncomfortable. Deputy Collins, a young man barely out of his teens who clearly found the assignment both baffling and awkward, hardly spoke 3 words to her during the entire trip. The wagon jolted over every rut and stone in the rough trail, and a fine layer of dust soon covered everything. By the time they reached the small mining town late the following day, Leanne was exhausted, sore, and desperately in need of a bath. But her discomfort was forgotten the moment they pulled up in front of the doctor's office. "Wait here," she told the deputy as she climbed down from the wagon. The doctor's office was a small wooden building with a sign that simply read M. Gonzalez, M.D. Leanne knocked firmly on the door, her heart pounding. A middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and spectacles opened the door. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for Nathan Reed," she said. "I was told he was injured and being treated here." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. "And you are?" "Leanne Sullivan, I'm—" She hesitated, unsure how to define her relationship with Nathan. "I'm a friend from Redemption Creek." Dr. Gonzalez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Mr. Reed is recovering in the back room. His injury was serious but not critical, a bullet to the shoulder." I removed it successfully, but he lost quite a bit of blood and developed a fever. He's been in and out of consciousness." Fear clutched at Leanne's heart. "May I see him?" The doctor hesitated. "It's not usually proper for a young lady to, please," Leanne interrupted. "I've come all this way." Something in her expression must have convinced him, for he nodded and stepped aside. "Very well, this way." He led her through a small waiting area to a door at the back. "Try not to excite him, he needs rest." Leanne nodded and entered the room. It was small and simply furnished, with a narrow bed, a chair, and a small table. Nathan lay on the bed, his face pale against the white pillow, his shoulder heavily bandaged. He appeared to be sleeping. She moved quietly to the bedside, her throat tight with emotion. He looked vulnerable in a way she hadn't thought possible for a man of his strength. Gently, she took his hand in hers, alarmed at the heat of his skin. "Nathan," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. For a moment his gaze was unfocused, confused. Then recognition dawned. "Leanne," his voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "Am I dreaming?" She smiled through the tears that had begun to form. "No, I'm really here. How?" "Sheriff Wilson told me you were hurt. I couldn't just wait in Redemption Creek, not knowing how you were." She squeezed his hand. "So I came." Nathan stared at her as if trying to comprehend. "You traveled all this way? For me?" "Yes," she said simply. He closed his eyes briefly, a mixture of emotions crossing his face. When he opened them again, they shone with a warmth that made her heart skip. "I've never had anyone do something like that for me before." Leanne brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "What happened?" "Harrington wasn't alone," Nathan replied, his voice gaining strength. "He had 2 friends with him, men I didn't know were connected to the gang. They ambushed me." His jaw tightened. "I got Harrington and one of the others, but the third got behind me, shot me before I could turn." "But you survived," she said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I had a promise to keep." The door opened and Dr. Gonzalez entered. "I think that's enough for now. Mr. Reed needs his rest, and I'm sure you need some yourself after your journey, Miss Sullivan." Nathan's grip on her hand tightened. "Where will you stay?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't think that far ahead." "There's a boarding house down the street," the doctor offered. "Mrs. Daniels takes in respectable female boarders. I can send word to her if you like." Leanne nodded gratefully. "Thank you." "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised Nathan, reluctantly releasing his hand. "I'll be here," he replied with a weak smile. As she followed the doctor out, Leanne felt both relief and concern. Nathan was alive, but his condition was serious, and she had no idea how long it would be before he was well enough to travel. The next few days fell into a pattern. Leanne would spend most of the day at Nathan's bedside, reading to him, talking, or simply sitting quietly while he slept. His fever broke on the 2nd day, and by the 4th, he was sitting up and eating solid food. They talked more during those days than they had in all their previous encounters combined. Leanne told him about her childhood in Boston, her parents, her dreams of someday starting her own school. Nathan, in turn, shared stories of his years as a lawman, of the places he'd seen, the good people he'd met, and occasionally the bad ones he'd brought to justice. What he didn't talk about was his future or whether she might have a place in it. On the 5th day, Dr. Gonzalez declared that Nathan could be moved to the boarding house if he wished, as long as he continued to rest and didn't strain his injured shoulder. "I need to get back to Redemption Creek," Nathan said, as Leanne helped him button his shirt over his bandaged shoulder. "There's reward money waiting, and I don't want to impose on your kindness any longer." "You're not imposing," Leanne said firmly, "and you're not ready for that journey yet." "I've traveled with worse injuries," he argued. She fixed him with a stern look. "Well, you're not doing it this time." "Not while I have any say in the matter." A strange expression crossed his face, surprise, followed by something warmer. "Yes, madam," he said softly. They moved to the boarding house that afternoon, where Mrs. Daniels gave Nathan a room on the ground floor to avoid him having to climb stairs. Leanne's room was on the 2nd floor, properly separated as befitted an unmarried lady and gentleman. though Mrs. Daniels watched them with curious, slightly disapproving eyes. That evening, they sat together on the small porch of the boarding house, watching as the mining town settled into its nightly routines. Miners fresh from their shifts filled the saloon across the street, while families retreated to their homes for supper. "It's different from Redemption Creek," Leanne observed. "Rougher, somehow." Nathan nodded. "Mining towns usually are. Men come for the silver or gold, not to put down roots. Makes for a different kind of place." "Is that how you see yourself?" she asked. "Someone not putting down roots?" He was quiet for a long moment. "It's all I've known," he finally said. "Moving from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments." "And is that what you want for the rest of your life?" Nathan turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "Until recently I never questioned it. It seemed simpler that way." "And now?" Leanne asked softly. "Now I'm not so sure." He reached over and took her hand in his. "Leanne, I need to say something, and I'm not good with words, so I'll just say it plain. These past few days with you, they've meant more to me than I can express. But I have to be honest, I don't know what I can offer you. My life is dangerous, unpredictable." "I'm not asking for promises, Nathan," she said, though her heart ached at his words. "Maybe you should," he replied, surprising her. "Maybe I need to make some." Before she could respond, a commotion from the saloon across the street drew their attention. Raised voices, then the sound of breaking glass. Nathan tensed beside her, his hand automatically moving toward his gun, which wasn't their doctor. Gonzalez had kept it for safekeeping. "It's just a typical saloon fight," Leanne said, placing her hand on his arm. "Nothing for you to worry about." Nathan relaxed slightly but kept his eyes on the saloon. "Force of habit. I've spent too many years expecting trouble." "Perhaps it's time for a different kind of life," she suggested carefully. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing possibilities he'd never considered before. "Perhaps it is." The next day, Nathan seemed stronger, more determined. He insisted on walking around the town, though he allowed Leanne to take his arm, ostensibly to support him if needed. They made an odd pair, the injured bounty hunter and the schoolteacher from back east, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. But Leanne found she didn't mind. There was something right about walking beside Nathan, something that felt like it was always meant to be. As they passed the telegraph office, Nathan said, "I should send word to Sheriff Wilson that we'll be returning soon." "Are you sure you're ready?" Leanne asked, concerned. "I will be in another day or two," he replied confidently. "And I'd rather recover the rest of the way in Redemption Creek." He hesitated, then added, "If that's all right with you." "Of course it is," she said, trying not to show how pleased she was by his desire to return with her. They continued their walk, eventually finding themselves at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to the vast expanse of the Arizona landscape. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warmth of the late spring day. Nathan stopped, gazing out at the view. "It's beautiful country," he said quietly. "Easy to see why people want to make a life here despite the hardships." "It is," Leanne agreed. "When I first came west, I was terrified. Everything seemed so wild, so untamed compared to Boston. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Even after what happened with those outlaws?" he asked. She looked up at him. "Especially after that. If it hadn't happened, I might never have met you." Nathan's expression softened. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Leanne's heart soared as she returned the kiss, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the night of dinner at the Wilsons'," he admitted. "I've been hoping you would," she confessed, making him smile. They stood there for a long moment, savoring the closeness before reluctantly turning back toward town. As they walked, Nathan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Leanne," he said as they neared the boarding house, "when we get back to Redemption Creek, I'd like to court you properly, if you're willing. Joy bubbled up inside her. I'd like that very much. 2 days later, they began the journey back to Redemption Creek. Deputy Collins, who had remained in Copper Ridge at Sheriff Wilson's instruction, drove the wagon while Leanne sat beside Nathan in the back, making sure he was comfortable despite the rough road. The journey seemed shorter this time, filled with conversation and shared smiles. By the time they reached the outskirts of Redemption Creek late the following afternoon, Leanne felt as though everything had changed. The town looked the same, yet somehow different, more like home than it had ever been before. Word of their arrival spread quickly. By the time they reached the main street, people were coming out of shops and homes to greet them. Sheriff Wilson was waiting in front of his office, a broad smile on his face. "Reed, good to see you in one piece," he called as the wagon came to a stop, "though I hear it was a close thing." Nathan climbed carefully down from the wagon, then turned to help Leanne. "Nothing that won't heal," he replied. "Thanks to Miss Sullivan's care." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly at the way Nathan's hand lingered on Leanne's waist after helping her down, but he said nothing about it. "The reward money for the Blackwater gang came through, $400 waiting for you at the bank." Nathan nodded his thanks. "I'll collect it tomorrow. Right now I could use a proper meal and a real bed." "The hotel's kept your room," Wilson informed him. "And Emma says you're both welcome for dinner tonight if you're up to it." Leanne glanced at Nathan, who looked tired from the journey. "Perhaps tomorrow night would be better," she suggested. "I think Mr. Reed needs rest after the trip." Of course," the sheriff agreed. "Tomorrow night it is." After arranging for her bag to be delivered to her quarters and saying goodbye to Deputy Collins, Leanne walked with Nathan to the hotel. They moved slowly, pausing often to accept well wishes from townspeople who seemed genuinely glad to see them both. "They've accepted you," Nathan observed as they reached the hotel. "This town, these people." "I suppose they have," Leanne agreed, realizing it was true. In the days after the incident with the Outlaws, and especially now, returning with Nathan, she felt a sense of belonging that had been missing since her parents' deaths. At the hotel entrance, they paused, both reluctant to part. "Will you be all right?" Leanne asked, eyeing his injured shoulder with concern. "I've had worse," he assured her with a small smile. "Nothing a good night's sleep won't help," she nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. In Copper Ridge, they had spent nearly every waking hour together. Now, back in Redemption Creek, the normal proprieties would reassert themselves. Nathan seemed to sense her thoughts. "I'll call on you tomorrow," he promised, "after you've had a chance to rest and settle back in." "I'd like that," she said softly. He glanced around, noting the curious eyes watching them from the street and hotel windows. With a slight smile, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture formal enough to be proper, yet intimate enough to make her pulse quicken. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, releasing her hand. Leanne walked back to her quarters above the schoolhouse in a daze of happiness, barely noticing the curious glances and whispers that followed her. Let them talk, she thought. For once in her life, she was following her heart instead of the rigid rules of propriety that had governed her Boston upbringing. The next morning, she woke early and decided to resume her teaching duties. The children were delighted to see her, bombarding her with questions about her journey and especially about Mr. Reed, the fast-drawing bounty hunter. "Is it true he killed 20 outlaws in a gunfight?" 10-year-old Jimmy Parker asked eagerly. "Certainly not," Leanne replied firmly. "Mr. Reed only uses his gun when absolutely necessary, and he prefers to bring criminals to justice alive whenever possible." "But he shot those men who tried to hurt you," Sarah Miller pointed out. "He did," Leanne acknowledged, "but he wounded them, not killed them." "There's an important difference. Are you going to marry him, Miss Sullivan?" Little Emily Jones asked innocently. The classroom erupted in giggles while Leanne felt her face grow warm. "That's quite enough questions for now," she said, clapping her hands. "Let's return to our arithmetic lesson." Despite her attempts to focus on teaching, Leanne found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Nathan throughout the day. Would he really call on her as promised? What would happen next? How long would he stay in Redemption Creek? She had just dismissed the children for the day when a knock came at the schoolhouse door. Her heart leapt, but it was only Mrs. Cooper from the general store. "Miss Sullivan," the older woman said with a warm smile, "I'm so glad you've returned safely. We were all quite worried when we heard about Mr. Reed's injury and your hasty departure to care for him." "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper," Leanne replied, recognizing the curiosity beneath the woman's friendly greeting. "Mr. Reed is recovering well." "So I hear," Mrs. Cooper said, her eyes twinkling. "I also hear he couldn't take his eyes off you during your return journey." The deputy was quite descriptive. Leanne felt herself blushing again. Deputy Collins has a vivid imagination. "Perhaps," Mrs. Cooper conceded, "but the whole town has noticed how Mr. Reed looks at you, and how you look at him." She patted Leanne's hand. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about, dear. Love is a blessing, especially when found in unexpected places." After Mrs. Cooper left, Leanne sat at her desk, contemplating the woman's words. Was it love she felt for Nathan? It seemed too soon, too sudden to put such a powerful name to her feelings. Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart raced when he was near, or how empty the world seemed when he wasn't. Another knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. This time, when she opened it, Nathan stood there, looking far more rested than the day before. He'd shaved and wore a clean shirt, though his ever-present gun belt remained at his hip. "Good afternoon, Miss Sullivan," he said formally, removing his hat. "I was hoping I might escort you on a walk if you're not too busy." Leanne smiled, pleased by the proper gesture. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Reed. Let me just get my shawl." They walked through town, maintaining a respectable distance between them, though Leanne was acutely aware of every accidental brush of their hands or shoulders. Nathan led her toward the edge of town, where a small creek ran through a grove of cottonwood trees, one of the few truly private spots near Redemption Creek. "How are you feeling today?" Leanne asked as they reached the shade of the trees. "Better," Nathan replied. "The doctor in Copper Ridge did good work. Another week or two and I should be fully healed." "And then?" she asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Nathan turned to face her, his expression serious. "That depends." "On what?" "On you," he said simply. "Leanne, I've been thinking a lot about what you said in Copper Ridge about a different kind of life, about putting down roots." Her heart began to beat faster. And I think I'd like to try it," he said, taking a step closer to her. "But only if you might consider being part of that life." Leanne's breath caught. "Nathan, what are you saying?" He took her hands in his touch gentle yet firm. "I'm saying that in just a few days you've changed everything for me, the way I see the world, the way I see my future. I know it's too fast by proper standards, but I've spent my life making split-second decisions, trusting my instincts. And every instinct I have tells me that you're someone special, someone I don't want to lose." Tears of happiness pricked at Leanne's eyes. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "It defies all logic, all propriety, but I can't deny what I feel for you." Nathan's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire countenance. Slowly, he leaned down and kissed her, more deeply than before, his arms encircling her waist as hers wound around his neck. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Nathan said, "I should probably mention that I spoke with Sheriff Wilson this morning. He mentioned they're looking for a deputy, someone to help keep the peace as the town grows. Said the job was mine if I wanted it." Leanne's eyes widened. "And do you want it, I mean?" "I told him I'd think about it," Nathan replied. "It would mean staying in one place, settling down." His eyes held hers. "Building a life." "Here, in Redemption Creek?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. He nodded. "If that's where you want to be." "Where you see your future." "It is," she said without hesitation, "especially if you're part of it." Nathan kissed her again, sealing the unspoken promise between them. That evening at dinner with the Wilsons, Nathan formally announced his intention to accept the deputy position and remain in Redemption Creek. Sheriff Wilson was delighted, while Emma cast knowing glances between Nathan and Leanne throughout the meal. As the weeks passed, Nathan settled into his new role with surprising ease. He had a natural authority that commanded respect, yet showed patience and fairness that earned him the trust of the townspeople. His reputation alone was enough to discourage most troublemakers, and those who did cause problems quickly learned to regret it. Leanne continued teaching, though now her walks to and from the schoolhouse were often accompanied by Nathan. They established a routine of having supper together most evenings, sometimes at the hotel restaurant, sometimes at the Wilsons', and occasionally, when propriety could be slightly bent, in Leanne's small quarters above the schoolhouse. Their courtship progressed steadily, observed with interest and generally approval by the town. Nathan proved to be attentive and thoughtful, bringing her wildflowers he found on his rounds or books ordered specially from back east. Leanne discovered a depth to him that few others saw: a quiet intelligence, a dry humor, and a gentleness that belied his dangerous reputation. One evening in late summer, nearly 3 months after the incident with the Outlaws, Nathan took Leanne on a ride outside of town. They found a peaceful spot overlooking the valley where they spread a blanket and shared a simple picnic as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Do you ever miss it?" Leanne asked as they watched the changing colors of the sky. "The freedom of moving from place to place, the excitement of the chase." Nathan considered her question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "not the danger or the loneliness, but the open spaces, the feeling of being beholden to no one." He took her hand in his. "But what I've found here. With you, it's worth far more than what I left behind. And you're really happy as a deputy. It's not too tame for you," he chuckled. "Keeping the peace in a growing town has its challenges. Besides, I still get to track down the occasional troublemaker. Just did it last week when those cattle rustlers came through." Leanne smiled, remembering how quickly Nathan had rounded up the would-be thieves. "You were impressive," she acknowledged. "I think half the young boys in town want to be just like Deputy Reed when they grow up." "God help us all if that happens," he said with a laugh. They fell into companionable silence as the sky deepened from gold to crimson to purple. Finally, as the first stars began to appear, Nathan turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Leanne," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. I never thought I'd find someone like you, never thought I deserved it." "Nathan," she started, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "Please, let me finish. I'm not good with fancy words or speeches, but I need to say this right." He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I was saving for a house," he said, "had nearly enough set aside. But then I passed by Mrs. Wilson looking at the jewelry in the general store window, and she convinced me this might be more important right now." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a small diamond set in gold. "Leanne Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy filled Leanne's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Nathan, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Then he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of all the love and promise between them. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church of Redemption Creek, with Sheriff Wilson standing as Nathan's best man and Emma Wilson as Leanne's matron of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night. As they danced under the stars, Nathan held Leanne close and whispered, "I never thought I'd have this: a home, a wife, a future worth fighting for." "Neither did I," she admitted. "When those outlaws grabbed me that day, I thought it might be the end. Instead, it was just the beginning." Nathan's arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I was there." "As do I," Leanne said, resting her head against his chest. "As do I." In the years that followed, Redemption Creek continued to grow, as did the Reed family. Nathan eventually became sheriff when Wilson retired, bringing his unique blend of justice and mercy to the role. Leanne realized her dream of starting her own school, which flourished under her guidance. Their home on the edge of town became known for its hospitality and warmth. Children played in the yard where Nathan's feared guns now hung safely out of reach, taken down only when necessary to protect the peace. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings when their children were asleep, Nathan and Leanne would sit on their porch and marvel at the path that had brought them together, how a moment of terrible danger had led to a lifetime of love. And occasionally, when newcomers to town heard the story of how they met of outlaws who tried to use her as a human shield, of a cowboy who stood still and outdrew them, all they would exchange a private smile, knowing that while the tale had grown in the telling, the truth of their love was even more remarkable than the legend.